I have spoken Russian all my life. I think in Russian. My way of expressing myself is Russian. Perhaps this is not immediately apparent in my music, but it is latent there, a part of its hidden nature. This statement by Igor Stravinsky, made in 1962 upon his return to his homeland after a 48-year absence, stands in stark contrast to the public image of aesthetic world citizenship he had so rigorously cultivated throughout his professional career. This apparent contradiction is indicative of a larger challenge musicians and scholars have faced in attempting to understand the man and his music. Among the great composers of the 20th century, Stravinsky was the most enduringly hailed as a master within the new electronically potentiated media environment, and his ideas about music were disseminated internationally in newspapers, magazines, and books, in radio broadcasts, and eventually on television. And yet Stravinsky's volubility hasn't necessarily led to a greater understanding of his work and the creative purposes that inspired it. Like a sea creature that releases a cloud of ink to escape a mortal threat, Stravinsky often dissembled when describing his work, seemingly compelled by an intense desire to maintain his stature as a modernist icon. He gilded this particular lily by referring to himself as an inventor of music, famously asserting that music is an abstract entity that's inherently incapable of expressing anything. And his determination to be seen as a stateless, cosmopolitan artist, untainted by the provincialities of nationalism, led him to claim a lifelong disinterest in folk music and to deny that folk materials played any significant role in his early works. But these widely accepted assertions have been largely disproven by the recent groundbreaking work of the musicologist Richard Taruskin, who has employed a combination of his pre-existing knowledge of Russian music with access to historical archives made available after the fall of the Soviet Union to demonstrate the extent to which Stravinsky's music is a product of Russian cultural traditions and his thoroughly Russian musical training. In this regard, Stravinsky's music for the Firebird has always been low-hanging fruit. The influence of his mentor Rimsky-Korsakov, an apostle of Russian musical nationalism, is easily perceived in this score. To represent the contrasting realms of virtuous humans and enchanted evildoers that populate the ballet, Stravinsky takes his cue from a technique Rimsky utilized in his final opera, The Golden Cockerel, completed just 3 years before the composition of the Firebird. Simple diatonic harmonies and melodies illustrate the human element in the Princess's Round Dance, which opens with a tune from Rimsky's collection of 100 folk songs called In the Garden, that's set in the manner of the Master's symphonic suite Scheherazade, and also in the finale, where the folk song By the Gate provides the context for the triumph of good over evil. This consonance is opposed by the chromatic, octatonic, and tritone-based harmonies and melodies that were staples of Rimsky's portrayals of the exotic, which Stravinsky employs to stunning effect in his depictions of the wicked sorcerer Kashai's domain, as in the ballet's opening and its infernal dance. But to characterize Stravinsky's music for the Firebird purely as a product of the nationalism championed by Rimsky-Korsakov and his circle is to overlook the essential originality and fluency that made it one of the most successful calling cards in the history of music and catapulted the 28-year-old composer to international prominence. More importantly, such an assessment obscures the diversity of the aesthetic streams from which Stravinsky was sampling during those formative years, the most important of which was produced by the Mir Iskustva, or World of Art, an artistic movement inspired by a magazine of the same name, founded in 1898 in St. Petersburg by the impresario Sergei Diaghilev and the artists Alexandre Benoit and Leon Bakst. Appalled by what they saw as the deplorable amateurism and provincialism of the nationalists and their insistence on social realism, this circle of reformers promoted the idea of art for art's sake and advocated an openness to cosmopolitan and experimental influences and trends. This movement was instrumental in the establishment in 1909 of the Ballet Russe, which would become the most influential ballet company of the 20th century. This was the ensemble for which Stravinsky wrote the 3 early ballets, the Firebird, Petrushka, and the Rite of Spring, that made his name. Thus, while the musical traditions of Stravinsky's homeland played a much greater role in his works than he was later willing to acknowledge, his formative years as a composer were also nurtured by approaches to art that valued abstraction, rejected romanticism, and advocated a spirit of experimentation, qualities that would become synonymous with the composer and his music. Although these elements are nascent in the Firebird, they are amply apparent in the astonishing litheness, energy, and precision with which Stravinsky presents his ideas, attributes that would be hallmarks of his music for the remainder of his highly eventful creative life.